Huwaei Digital Nepal Conclave 2022 in association with Info Developers, connected by Ncell.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers of Digital Nepal Conclave for inviting me here. It's really a great honor, and as you'll see, it takes me back 6 years to some of my first events here in Nepal. So it's really a great honor and pleasure to be here. Thank you all for attending this morning. Yesterday was a great session. I particularly liked the end of the day when we were talking about investment in Nepal and IT opportunities here, because that's really my story as well. If you look at my background, for the last 26 years I've been focused on investment in technology trends, and the opportunities in technology. For the last 22 years as a venture capital investor and a general partner in venture capital firms. I've also worked during that time starting up new startup companies. So I've invested in over 2 dozen startup technology companies, as well as founding 5 companies, working as every role within those companies, from, of course, board member to CEO and other positions, and really have a significant amount of relevant experience that I think you'll benefit from some of the insights and experience that I've had. My main business as a venture capital investor is focused on taking the world's largest and most successful enterprise software companies, SaaS companies, and bringing them to Japan by establishing their subsidiary in Japan as a joint venture company. So Sunbridge, my firm, co-founded Salesforce.com Japan, Concur Japan, Marketo Japan, Kyriba Japan, Demandware Japan. These are all multi-billion-dollar SaaS companies in the US, and we set up their Japan subsidiaries, which also grew to hundreds of millions of dollars of sales, in some cases hundreds of employees. A very great success for us and for our investors as well. Within that context, I've also co-founded a company called Talenta for Talent Asia, focused on HR and talent management distribution within Japan for international companies. So again, companies like HireVue, Monday.com, we're their Japan distributor. So many years, many decades of focus on market entry opportunities. My experience with Nepal and focus on Nepal activities begins as early as 2008. Before that, when I got involved with New IT Ventures, which is an Internet of Mobile Video company founded in Japan by Nepal investors and engineers, but with activities here in Nepal, including developing Net TV Nepal here. They had a relationship with one of our other portfolio companies in Tokyo, the New Media Group. The New Media Group failed, but NITV was doing everything right as far as we could tell. So I joined the board in 2008 of NITV and began working here in Nepal remotely. And the request from the investors, from the CEO, was come to Nepal, check it out, learn what we're doing here, because there's more opportunity. And we were intrigued by this because NITV was developing as good or better technology as any company in the world, but at extremely reduced costs, extremely smaller investment. And so I came to Nepal at the beginning of 2016, in February 2016, and I spoke at events similar to this, arranged by Entrepreneurs Network of Nepal, by Hempel Shrestha, one of the organizers of this conference. I spoke to young entrepreneurs and students and others. I also met as many technology companies as I could in Nepal. And I even had an opportunity to speak with and to some government ministries about IT opportunities and investment here in Nepal. And during that trip, we've really focused on what my experience of investing in IT and what the opportunities were here in Nepal. And we came up with, or we looked at 3 options. Those would include domestic Nepal sales as a focus of an investment or a business, international sales, or outsourcing. And I'll talk about each of those briefly as we go to give you some context of what we thought 6 years ago. In terms of domestic Nepal sales, looking at it from the standpoint of a joint venture company with a large international IT firm like we did in Japan, it seemed frankly that the market was too small. Japan is the second largest IT market in the world, one of the second largest SaaS market as well, very, very large and sustainable market. We could build joint venture companies, subsidiaries that were massive operations. In Nepal, the scope of the market isn't that big for that. So we thought a distribution company could do well here for international products, international IT services. But in that case, that wasn't our focus. We didn't have experience in Nepal. It was too small of an opportunity for our venture capital fund. We also looked at companies starting up here in Nepal, what they could do. There's a great viability for what we'd call copycat companies, where you take an internationally successful idea, business process, and you establish it in Nepal as its own company, its own venture. And there's been very successful companies with that here in Nepal. We also looked at international sales opportunities. For a local company, headquartered, founded, established here in Nepal, it seemed that it was very difficult for them to work internationally. There was a huge opportunity with the mobile app stores from Apple and Android for any developer anywhere in the world to develop mobile applications and sell those mobile applications. But it was very hard, and maybe still is very hard, for local developers to even set up accounts with the App Store, the Apple App Store, to sell their apps, or the Android store, to take remittances from those stores, to pay developer fees with an international credit card. It was very difficult for Nepal companies, because of regulations and other factors, to do business internationally. But we did meet and see a number of successful companies in which there was a foreign headquarters in the US or other places, and that was the focus of the business operations of the company, but they had a back-end services and development in Nepal, and that seemed like a very, very viable option for us. And finally, we looked at outsourcing. The reason we looked at outsourcing was during that trip, my brother accompanied me. He was 28 years with Accenture as one of their senior executives. When he left Accenture, he managed 18,000 developers, 12,000 in India, 4,000 in the Philippines, and 2,000 in China, and he stood up those operations in the Philippines and China. So when he came with me to Nepal, the first question he asked was, can we hire 1,000 people? You know, can we set up an outsourcing center for Accenture, for another company, for ourselves? And the answer, a little bit surprisingly to me, but based on his experience, was no, that generic outsourcing would not be that successful from Nepal, because it wasn't clear, as mentioned yesterday, Nepal didn't have a strong enough brand. People know outsourcing from India, people know outsourcing from Vietnam. You can fly to India. You couldn't fly at that time directly to Nepal. You had to stop several places. There weren't 5-star hotels near the development centers in Nepal. It wasn't viable to have a very large-scale outsourcing business here in Nepal at that time. We felt there were political turmoil, there were power cuts, there were other issues. But at the same time, looking at the quality of the talent, we found the interest and excitement here, we felt that there was an opportunity to focus on specialized outsourcing here in Nepal. And meaning, if you had a team that was 100% certified Salesforce engineers, then you could sell certified Salesforce services anywhere in the world. It wouldn't matter if you were in Nepal or India or anywhere else. So if you had a market that was in high demand and you had properly trained engineers, that it would be viable to do outsourcing from Nepal. And so at that time, we set up our company that's operating here in Nepal and globally, called Paracosma. It's a US headquartered company, and Paracosma Incorporated. We have some other brands there as well, including To the Moon 3D Technologies. And we have wholly owned subsidiaries here in Nepal for our development center, and in Japan as well for sales and technology. And this company focuses on virtual and augmented reality. And the reason it does that is, at the time in 2016, there was just the first consumer launch of the HTC Vive VR headset, the Oculus Rift VR headset, and the PlayStation 4 PlayStation VR headset. And yet, it was a new technology. There weren't a lot of incumbents in the space. And so a survey at the time of US companies and product developers, project managers, said that 88% of companies wanted to do AR and VR development, but 55%, more than 55% of those companies were likely or very likely to outsource that development because they didn't have the budget for it, they didn't have the skills on their team for it, or they didn't have enough developers. And these were all problems that could be solved by an outsourcing company like Paracosma. And so we decided to focus on virtual reality, but virtual reality itself had many decades-long history. Our name Paracosma comes from a 1935 short story about VR. And so we decided we needed longevity for the company, so low costs here in Nepal would also be an advantage. And you know, people say, why Nepal? And what I tell them consistently is there's 30,000 people in Nepal. So there's as many brilliant people here in Nepal as there are in California or in Tokyo. They just don't have the same opportunity. And so what we did is we went out to the leading colleges and universities, and we recruited the best students. And we said, we can train them in VR. We can build a team because no one else in the world has skills in VR now. We're starting at an even level with those. And so we began in 2016. We were doubling every year in terms of our head count. During the pandemic, we froze hiring, but we also froze firing or layoffs and maintained our team, and then began growing again at the end of 2021. We're now 111 people globally, almost 100 here in Nepal. So it's very much a Nepal-focused company. In terms of the manpower, the labor, the resources, but we're a global company in every other respect. We're members of all the leading global VR and AR associations, founding members of the International VR for Healthcare Association, focus principally on the US market, but also Japan. We have very little marketing here in Nepal because, again, we're focused and intended to be a global company. And we've received recognition for that as one of the 5 best AR/VR solution providers by 3 publications this year, a couple last year, most innovative AR/VR company, most trusted AR/VR company. We've really done a great job in establishing our presence globally. And with that as kind of an introduction, you understand my investment experience, why Nepal, why VR development. These are things I wanted to talk about because of the sessions yesterday, but in terms of digital transformation, I want to touch briefly on 2 very, very key developments that are transforming technology globally and will transform technology in Nepal. One of those is the impact on remote development from the pandemic. And we look at Paracosma and what we've done as 3 phases and types of development. Initially, we did in-house projects. And those were great because our team was new. We didn't have experience. We didn't have a lot of customers initially. And so you had no fixed plan. You could learn as you go. You could do R&D. The deadlines were self-imposed. And if the product wasn't so great, it became a demo instead of a product. And so that was very compatible with us. If we developed great products, then we would fall into that category of an international headquarter and Nepal back end. But we also focused on outsourced projects. And in this case, the entire project was outsourced. So there was usually one point of communications between the US and Nepal, usually myself. So communication was clear. And the team had expertise. That's what was part of our pitch to the company. But we could also do R&D behind the scenes if we didn't quite know how to do it. The customer didn't see that. They saw the end product. So we could have 100 developers or 1 developer on the project. It didn't really matter. They couldn't judge our performance, our efficiency, our productivity. They saw the end result. And sometimes quality was an issue, not in the visuals, not in how the product looked, but in whether we had properly made our code, written our code. We were using the best practices in certain ways because we didn't necessarily learn those working in-house because no one was looking at it. And deadlines matter. And the theme that I kept telling my my employees is this is not a student project. The mentality you have with an internal project or at the university is you do something good enough, it gets you a grade, but in this case it has to be perfect. It has to bring the client back to the company. And now we're entering an entirely new phase brought on by the pandemic mostly. The pandemic's been a horrible scourge here in Nepal, in the US as well, globally. It kept me away from Nepal. I had 27 trips to Nepal before the pandemic. I was here 20% of my time, and then away for 28 months. Now I'm back in Nepal for all this month. But there's been a huge transformation. In the US, especially for technology companies, remote work has become the norm, not the exception. There's some companies trying to force employees back to the office, but this is statistics on office access, and it went from nearly 100%, 95% before the pandemic, down to as low as 5%, and now in some cities is only as high as 25% back in the office in terms of the prior numbers as well. And we've seen a great migration in the U.S. from big cities, from urban centers where the headquarters of these companies were, to remote locations, better quality of life, better quality of living, and the engineers have gone that way as well. And so in advertisements for engineers in the U.S., now it's over 77% remote jobs versus 25% on-site jobs. And this was earlier in the pandemic, but this trend is holding true, is now every company is operating with remote workers. So the impact for us as an outsourcing company is now, instead of outsourcing projects, those companies are insourcing developers. Now there's no distinction between a Nepal developer and a US developer, or a Kenyan developer, or a Ukrainian developer. Any developer can work in a company anywhere in the world because of this trend. Before, there was a great bias into you need to be in the office, you have an employee badge, you're part of the employee team. Now, our engineers interact directly with the client companies. They're in the daily stand-up meetings, they're in the check-in meetings. The client is watching our hours, they're watching our code, they're watching our performance, and the bar of expectation has elevated dramatically. Just as it increased from in-house projects to outsourced projects. Now we have to perform near the level of a US engineer, near the level of a full-time employee. And they're seeing who's working, how long they're working, and communication skills are paramount. The developers have to speak up on the Zoom calls. They have to have their camera on. They have to be asking the questions. They can't just passively say, yeah, it's going all right, or the project will fail. They'll fail within that project. So now we're at a level of expectation beyond what we had before. And this is critical for Nepal because it's going to be hard to go back to blind outsourcing where people don't really watch what's going on. Because at the same time, they can hire now engineers anywhere. So the competition is global, not just locality-based. And finally, I know I'm at my time limit here, but there's one other trend that I think is important if you're starting a company here in Nepal or globally that's really important to talk about. You know, normally I come from a background of a technology trends and technology investment, and I talk about the evolution of computers and chips and so forth. I talk about the adoption of the internet and mobile phones and these types of trends. But what's more important right now are the kind of the soft trends that transform the digital landscape and transform how people do business and create market-leading companies. And so these transitions included going from text-based bulletin board systems to HTML-based World Wide Web pages, from bricks and mortar retail to Amazon online e-commerce. And so you had Netscape from the first wave, then Amazon, then going from print advertising and billboards to SEO, search engine optimization, and Google Ads. For Salesforce, the change from on-premise enterprise software to software as a service, from desktop to mobile with the huge advance of Apple and the iPhone and their iPads, from individual to social with Facebook, and audio to data and then data to video, where you have companies like today, Zoom and Netflix are dominating a lot of the technology discussion. Over 80% of internet traffic is video. But what I want to mention today and highlight is we founded originally a VR company, and then we added AR and 3D modeling. But what we discovered quickly is that there's a massive trend going on to transform all of IT from 2D to 3D. And it's not about VR. It's about this transition from 2D to 3D. And this impacts everything in technology, from 3D printing to self-driving cars, deepfake video, studio photography replacement with 3D renders, virtual movie making, the norm in Hollywood and globally now, and on and on and on. These categories are impacted by this transition. So if you're looking for an opportunity, you're looking for a chance, then this is one of the key trends you need to focus on. And finally, I'll just comment a couple comments that come from my experience working here in Nepal and the challenges we've had with employees in our business here. One is a general culture that immigration outside Nepal is a path to opportunity, that our employees sometimes leave the company or want to leave the company to go overseas to get a master's, to work for a foreign company, rather than build their career and their opportunity in Nepal. We need to show them with companies like Paracosma there's a great opportunity here in Nepal. Secondly, there's a globalization of new opportunities. If it's a new business, there's no advantage anywhere in the world. It can be advantage here in Nepal, whether it's AI or robotics or VR or any number of areas. If there's no incumbents, then we can compete and win with our quality of our brains and our capability. But the competition just got global as well. The barriers that we had before are really fading, and Nepal has to step up its game and the quality of its resources in order to compete. And this relates to this project outsourcing to insourcing trend that I mentioned. It's more demanding, but also vastly more opportunity. We can charge very high rates for a developer insourced into a U.S. company compared to what we could command for an outsourced project in Nepal. So this is beneficial to the economy, beneficial to our engineers as well. And finally, there needs to be a perception of the new technologies as being viable. Our business is made on simulations, 3D simulations, that are done in what's called a game engine. But the colleges and universities maybe don't believe that they should train their engineers in game making here in Nepal. But it's not about game making, it's about simulation and training. It's about other opportunities where these technologies play out. And I skipped one there, but there's also a somewhat uneven playing field. So in mobile development, for example, the Apple App Store is vaster than the Android Store. The revenues to developers in the Apple App Store are much higher than Android. But if 98% of the people in Nepal use Android instead of Apple, we don't have a level playing field to develop and produce and sell Apple apps. And this will impact, same with the game engines. Unity game engines, cheaper, easier to run here in Nepal. The engineers learn that. They don't learn Unreal Engine, which is more expensive, uses more hardware and things like this. But that will be the future that we need to learn. And when the Apple VR headset comes out at $2,000, $3,000, that will be beyond our college students here in Nepal. And so we need the support of companies like Paracosma to equalize that playing field, for us to give the most brilliant people their opportunities. And if we do that, we can have a great success here in Nepal. So thank you very much.